Winter settled over Broken Arrow Valley, like a quiet breath the land had been holding for years. A thin veil of frost stretched across the earth in delicate lace. The sun rose slowly, pale and distant, casting long silver strokes over the cabins scattered near the river. Smoke drifted from chimneys in soft spirals. The world felt hushed, like a great story pausing before its next line. Eleanor Hayes stepped onto her porch, arms wrapped around her body, though the wind still found its way beneath her shawl. She looked older than 30 in that moment, not in face but in weariness, in the way a widow learns to carry the weight of every hour. Her children still slept inside, their breathing faint through the thin cabin walls. Lydia curled tightly as a fawn in winter grass. Caleb sprawled stubbornly like a boy, trying to grow into a man faster than time would allow. Eleanor scanned the firewood pile. It was shrinking again. She would have to chop more before noon, before the cold settled deeper. She tried not to think of last winter, the one that stole her husband in a single fevered night. The world had not slowed its turning for her grief. It had carried her forward, step by trembling step, until she learned to keep moving, because stopping meant remembering too clearly the kind of loneliness that hollowed bone. She gripped the axe and walked toward the stump, frost cracking beneath her boots. The first swing jarred her arms. Her fingers slipped. The second swing barely split the log. A sharp ache traveled through her shoulders. She exhaled, long and tired, and set the axe down. Her eyes stung in the cold. Then she felt it, that subtle shift in the wind that told her she was no longer alone. Tala Redhawk emerged from the tree line, a towering figure against the pale morning. 34, broad as the horizon itself, skin bronzed even in winter's bite. Shirtless despite the cold, as if his warmth came from a deeper place the frost could not reach. He carried a bundle of timber on one shoulder, the weight barely bending him. Eleanor's breath caught. Not from fear. Tala had never given the valley reason for fear. It was the quiet in him, the way he moved like the land's shadow, appearing only when needed, vanishing before thanks could be spoken. He set the bundle down near her dwindling pile. She opened her mouth to speak, but he had already picked up the axe, fingers closing around the handle like it was an old friend. One swift motion, clean and powerful, split the first log. Another followed, then another, each strike steady as a heartbeat. Eleanor watched, unsure if she should thank him or pretend she had been managing fine. Pride and gratitude tangled inside her like roots fighting for soil. "You don't have to," she murmured, her voice barely carrying. Tala paused only a moment, eyes meeting hers. They were dark, ancient in a way that made her feel seen and unseen at once. Then he returned to chopping, as if her words were simply wind passing by. She stepped closer. "You helped last week too. And the week before." He finally spoke, his voice low, shaped by quiet places. "Cold is cruel. Wood is needed." There was no room for argument in those words, but no command either. Just truth spoken plainly. Caleb's voice called from inside the cabin, pulling Eleanor's attention away. When she returned a minute later, Tala had finished the entire pile, stacked it neatly, and was walking back toward the trees. Not leaving, retreating, as though closeness were something dangerous. Eleanor wanted to call after him. To ask why he always vanished, why he refused the bread she offered last time, why he helped like a silent guardian yet kept himself at a distance. But her voice stayed trapped in her throat, wrapped in the same hesitation that had guided her since her husband's death. Inside, Lydia tugged on her skirt, wide-eyed. Was it the giant man again? Eleanor smiled faintly. "His name is Tala." "Why doesn't he talk much?" The girl whispered. "Some hearts," Eleanor said softly, brushing snow from her daughter's hair, "speak in other ways." But even as she said it, a small ache pressed at her ribs. She wished he would speak. Just once. Not about wood or winter, but about something human, something tender. Later, while Caleb tried to mend his torn mittens and Lydia traced patterns on the frost-covered window, Eleanor went outside again. She touched the stacked wood, feeling the strength in each piece. Tala had done in minutes what would have taken her hours. Her throat tightened with gratitude she couldn't express to a man who carried silence like armor. She scanned the tree line. Nothing but shadows. Across the valley, Tala watched from a ridge, arms crossed loosely over his chest. Helping Eleanor eased something inside him, but it also woke the sorrow he had buried long ago. Love had once been his future. Now it was a grave he walked around but never dared to approach. Eleanor's eyes unsettled him. They held gentleness, but also a quiet, stubborn hope that pulled at the corners of his soul. He turned away before the feeling grew dangerous. As the light began to fade, Eleanor gathered her children close around the fire. The cabin crackled with warmth she had not expected to feel today. Yet underneath the comfort lay a truth. She couldn't carry the winter alone, not truly. Something in her life had begun to shift, like ice cracking beneath the first hint of spring. She didn't know if the change was a blessing or a warning. But as she blew out the lantern, she heard a distant sound. Wood being chopped again, somewhere beyond her yard, steady and sure. And she realized Tala Redhawk was not done helping her. He kept his distance until he could no longer stay away. Winter tightened its grip on Broken Arrow Valley, in a way that made every dawn feel like an unspoken test. The cold no longer drifted. It pressed, insistent, slipping through shutters, clinging to clothes, reminding every soul in the settlement that survival was not a given, but a choice renewed each day. Eleanor Hayes woke with that truth resting on her shoulders, familiar yet heavy, as she moved quietly through her cabin, so the children could sleep a few minutes longer before the morning chill. Caleb's injured hands still throbbed, though he tried to hide it behind stubborn expressions and mumbled assurances. Lydia clung to her blanket, afraid of the cold as if winter itself watched her from the window. Eleanor touched their foreheads, whispered encouragements, and stepped outside with the basket she hoped to fill with anything edible. Roots, winter berries, anything the land had not tucked too deeply away. The wind carried the crisp scent of pine, and the faintest trace of smoke from distant fires. Eleanor walked toward the river, boots crunching rhythmically over frost. She paused often, not for rest but to listen. Winter taught its own version of caution. Snow could disguise danger, but so could silence, and she had 2 children depending on her steady steps. As she dug near the willow roots, she noticed the quiet shift that had become oddly familiar. The feeling of being watched not by threat, but by something protective. Tala Redhawk stood a short distance away, tall as the cliff walls, winter light glinting off his bare shoulders. He held a small bundle of dried herbs, something gathered from deeper lands only he seemed to know how to read. Eleanor straightened, brushing frost from her gloves. "You've been up since before the sun," she said gently, though she knew he might not answer. Tala approached silently, and placed the herbs in her basket. "For the boy's hand," he murmured. Her breath caught at his thoughtfulness. "Thank you. He'll be grateful." But Tala's gaze drifted away, as if gratitude were a weight he wasn't built to carry. His silence pressed between them, not unkind, but firm like a wooden door that refused to open even when its hinges ached. Eleanor wondered what memories he kept behind that door, what ghosts walked with him through the early mornings and quiet nights. She offered him a small smile. "I brought something for you too." From the basket's side pocket, she pulled a folded quilt, blue and cream, patched carefully over weeks whenever her own exhaustion allowed. "For the cold," she added, though her voice faltered. Maybe it was foolish to offer comfort to a man who seemed impervious to winter. Tala looked at the quilt, as if it were a fragile creature he didn't know how to hold. After a long moment, he shook his head. "I need little." "You deserve warmth as much as anyone," she whispered, hoping he would hear the sincerity more than the words. But he only stepped back, eyes clouding, and Eleanor felt the invisible wall rise higher, shutting her out before she had ever truly stepped in. They walked back toward the settlement in near silence. Lydia ran toward her, cheeks flushed, hair wild from sleep. "Mama, the chimney's making that noise again," she cried. Eleanor felt the familiar dread knot inside her. The chimney had cracked last week, and though she patched it as best as she could, the wind still found ways to howl through it like a restless spirit. Before she could respond, Tala's deep voice rumbled beside her. "I'll look." Eleanor blinked. "You don't have to." His expression didn't change. "Cold hurts children." There was no argument strong enough to counter that simple truth. Eleanor nodded, relief warming her more than the patched coat she wore. Inside the cabin, Tala inspected the chimney with the calm precision of someone who had repaired far worse. He strengthened the stones, sealed gaps with clay he fetched from the riverbank, and rebuilt the top with steady hands that worked as if shaped by patience rather than speed. Eleanor watched him from the doorway, struck by the contrast of his imposing frame and the gentle care with which he handled each piece. When he finished, the cabin felt different, safer, sturdier, as if winter had one less way to slip inside. Lydia approached him timidly, holding out a small wooden toy she had carved with Caleb. "For you," she said shyly. Tala hesitated, the same way he had with the quilt, but this time he accepted the gift. The tiniest shift crossed his face. Not a smile, but something softened, something unguarded. Lydia beamed, and Eleanor's heart warmed at the scene. That evening, as Eleanor prepared stew from the sparse ingredients she'd gathered, a knock sounded at the door. Douglas Avery stood on her porch, hat in hand, coat polished, boots shining. He carried an air of confidence that never seemed to waver, not even around grief. "Mrs. Hayes," he said with a practiced charm, "I heard the wind gave your chimney trouble. Thought I'd check in." She tried to keep her tone polite. "It's fixed now." Douglas's gaze drifted past her shoulder, lingering on the newly repaired structure. He frowned. "Who helped you?" "Tala Redhawk." The name made Douglas stiffen. "You should be careful letting a man like that around your home," he warned. "People talk." Eleanor's chest tightened, not from fear, but from irritation. "He's never given me reason to worry." "Widow or not," Douglas continued, voice dipping low, "you need a proper man to look after you. Someone the town respects." "I can look after my children," she answered firmly. He stepped closer, lowering his voice even further. "But can you look after yourself?" Before Eleanor could respond, Tala appeared at the edge of her yard, silent as dusk. Douglas stiffened again, swallowed whatever he'd planned to say, and tipped his hat sharply. "Think about what I said." After he left, Eleanor stood in the fading light, shaken by the implication buried in his words. Tala lingered only a moment before turning to go, but she stopped him with a single breath. "Why don't you let people see who you really are?" she asked softly. For the first time, Tala looked directly at her, something raw flickering behind his eyes. "People see enough." Then he walked away, leaving Eleanor with a question she couldn't silence. Was the world wrong about him, or was he simply afraid to be known? Night crept over the valley, shadows stretching long across the snow-dusted ground. As Eleanor tucked her children into bed, she felt the shift again, the sense that winter had brought not just hardship, but a crossroads she hadn't expected. She blew out the lantern, settling into the stillness, but sleep did not come quickly. Somewhere outside, beneath the quiet moon, Tala stood watching her cabin from a distance, torn between the safety of solitude and the pull of a life that frightened him more than the darkest winter night. Yet as the last ember dimmed, a sound rose from the treeline, soft, deliberate, undeniable, forcing Eleanor to realize that winter was not the only thing approaching her door that night. Winter deepened with the slow, relentless patience of something ancient, a presence that did not need storms to show its strength. It crept into the spaces between days, tightening its grip on Broken Arrow Valley, until even the air seemed to hold its breath. Eleanor Hayes felt that tightening in every chore, every quiet morning before the children woke, every night when the fire dimmed and her thoughts grew louder. The cold had a way of pressing truths to the surface, and the truth she feared most was simple. She was running out of strength to face the season alone. Caleb's injured hand healed slowly, far slower than he pretended. He still tried to prove he could do a man's work, shoulders tense with determination, jaw set like stone. Lydia clung to him whenever he stepped outside, worried he might drift away like smoke. Eleanor watched them both with a mix of pride and heartbreak. They were children trying to carry weights that should have been shared long before winter arrived. One morning, after Caleb failed again to load the small rifle he insisted on using, Eleanor walked to the riverbank to clear her thoughts. Frost glittered in fragile patterns along the reeds, and the water's quiet murmur felt like a distant song. She knelt to dig for roots, her breath turning to pale ghosts in the air. She worked without thinking until the familiar sensation brushed against her, the subtle shift of the world that came whenever Tala Redhawk was near. He emerged from the trees with the silent certainty of dusk settling over land. Strong, unbothered by the cold, he carried snared rabbits and fresh herbs in one hand. Eleanor stood, unable to hide the tremor of relief that passed through her. He crossed the shallow water and stopped beside her, setting down the herbs first. "For your son," he said. "They will ease the swelling." "Thank you," she murmured, though gratitude felt too small a word for the comfort he offered without ever asking for anything in return. They worked side by side for a few quiet minutes. She watched the movement of his hands, powerful, yet careful, as though strength was something he chose to wield instead of something that ruled him. She wished she understood him better. Wished he would stay long enough to let her try. The thought alone made her breath catch. "Tala," she said finally, unable to hold the question inside. "Why do you keep helping us?" He paused, but only briefly. "Because winter is cruel." "That can't be the only reason." His gaze flickered, almost pained, before he lifted his traps and stepped back. "It is enough." He walked away before she could press further, leaving her alone with the quiet ache of wanting answers he wasn't ready to give. Gossip spread through the settlement faster than the frost. Women at the well whispered behind cupped hands. Men in the trading post exchanged glances heavy with unspoken judgments. Eleanor endured their stares, chin raised, though each one cut deeper than she allowed herself to show. She had lived through enough loss to ignore cruel tongues, but the constant murmurs chipped at her slowly, like water wearing grooves in stone. Douglas Avery confronted her near the blacksmith shop. His polished boots gleamed despite the mud, and his confidence was as loud as his voice. "You're letting the wrong man linger around you," he said. "A widow needs someone respectable. Someone stable." "Tala has done nothing but help me," Eleanor replied, though her pulse quickened. "Help?" Douglas scoffed. "A man like him doesn't help without wanting something." "And what do you want?" she asked quietly. His smile faltered. "A future. Security. You can't give your children that alone." She stepped away, unwilling to hear more. Douglas muttered something sharp as he turned, but she let the words fall behind her like broken twigs. That evening, the river drew her again. The water glimmered under the fading light, soft and silver. She stood at its edge, trying to steady the thoughts that churned inside her like unsettled dust. Tala appeared from the shadows, breath steady, steps measured. "You should not be alone," he said. She looked at him, really looked, and the truth surfaced with startling clarity. She trusted him more than anyone left in this world. "I'm alone more often than not," she said softly. He said nothing, but something in his expression shifted. A flicker, a hesitation, the kind of silence that carried meaning beneath it. She drew a breath deeper than she meant to. "My children need someone to guide them," she began. "Someone steady. Someone who won't vanish with the next change of season." Tala's jaw tightened, but he still didn't speak. Her heart pounded. "Tala, could you ever be a father to them?" The question hung in the air like fragile glass. He went utterly still. For a long, breathless moment, neither of them moved. Then he stepped back, eyes darkening with something she'd never seen in him, fear. "No," he whispered. The words shattered inside her. She looked down quickly, swallowing the heat burning behind her eyes. "I shouldn't have asked. I'm sorry." He shook his head, pain flickering through his voice. "It is not you. It is what you ask of me." She forced herself to meet his gaze. "I asked for a partner, Tala. For help. For someone who cares." "You are strong," he said. "You don't need me." "Maybe strength isn't the same as not needing," she whispered. He looked away, as though her words struck something buried too deep to face. "I cannot give what you seek." Then he turned and walked into the dusk, leaving her by the river with the echo of her own courage weighing heavier than any winter burden. When she returned home, Caleb noticed her shaken breath, Lydia clung to her skirt without knowing why, and Eleanor tried to smile for them both. After tucking them into bed, she stepped outside again, letting the cold numb the tightness in her chest. The trees swayed in the faintest wind. The moon hung low, casting pale silver across the ground. She stared toward the dark line of the forest where Tala had disappeared, wondering if she'd lost something she never truly had. Then a sharp sound cracked through the night. Loud, sudden, unmistakable. Not a branch. Not an animal. Something breaking. And the silence that followed was thick enough to steal her breath. Night settled over Broken Arrow Valley with a weight that felt almost sentient, a hush so complete even the river seemed to hold its breath. After the sharp noise that fractured the stillness, Eleanor Hayes waited on her porch, heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She searched the tree line for movement, breath clouding in the frozen air. But nothing stirred. No figure emerged. No danger followed. Only silence remained, thick enough to smother thought. She eventually returned inside, though sleep never touched her. Her mind hovered between fear and something more fragile. Hope that the sound was not a warning but a sign that Tala Redhawk, somewhere in the dark, was breaking too. Morning arrived reluctantly, gray and hollow. Eleanor filled the kettle, stoked the fire, and moved through her tasks like a shadow of herself. Caleb sensed her tension and tried to distract Lydia with small stories, though his hand still trembled slightly from its lingering injury. Eleanor brushed his hair gently, grateful for his effort even as her heart tugged with worry. By midday, old Marisol appeared at the door, wrapped in her heavy shawl, leaning on her twisted walking stick. Her eyes, though clouded with age, saw more than most. She studied Eleanor a moment before stepping inside without waiting for invitation, as if guided by instinct rather than courtesy. "You didn't sleep," Marisol said. Eleanor poured tea, hands unsteady. "There was a sound last night. Near the woods." Marisol's brows lifted slightly. "A sound can mean many things." "Or someone," Eleanor whispered. Marisol took the cup but didn't drink. After a long pause, she said quietly, "I spoke with Tala this morning." Eleanor's breath caught. "He's all right?" "He is breathing," Marisol said. "But his heart, that is another matter." Eleanor sat, unsure she wanted to hear more but unable to stop herself. Marisol stretched her hands toward the fire, warming her tired fingers. "You asked him something he has spent years burying. Asking a man like Tala to be father, partner, anything tied to love, opens a wound he never allowed to heal." Eleanor's chest tightened. "I didn't mean to hurt him." "You didn't," Marisol said gently. "You touched a part of him he thought was long dead. That is what frightened him." The words slid into Eleanor like a quiet revelation. She lowered her gaze, letting them settle. "What happened to him?" Marisol sighed, the sound carrying years of unspoken memory. "There was a woman once. Nayeli. Bright as the summer sun, brave as the storm winds. Tala loved her in the way only a man with a loyal soul can love, deeply, quietly, endlessly." Eleanor felt her breath tremble. "What happened to her?" "Tragedy," Marisol whispered. "A raid no one expected. Nayeli was struck down before Tala could reach her. He carried her to safety, but it was too late. She died in his arms." Eleanor pressed a hand to her throat. The image, Tala's strength collapsing around a loss he could not prevent, unraveled something inside her. "He blamed himself," Marisol continued, "as if he could bend fate with his hands alone. After that, he withdrew. Helped others from a distance. Spoke only when necessary. And whenever kindness came too close, he stepped away." Eleanor looked toward the window, where frost wove delicate patterns like unanswered questions. "I asked something impossibly heavy of him, didn't I?" "You asked for a future," Marisol said softly. "He is still living in a grave." The truth stung with a clarity that left Eleanor breathless. She hadn't misread Tala's gentleness. She hadn't imagined the warmth beneath his silence. She had only spoken faster than his heart could keep pace. Marisol set the cup down with finality. "Do not chase him. Let him come to the place where breathing hurts less than running." Then she stood, leaving Eleanor with more answers than comfort. Later that afternoon, Eleanor tried to focus on repairing her mended shawl, but her hands worked without rhythm. Her thoughts wandered to Tala. How he had turned from her at the river, how he had looked as though her question had split something open. The thought of him hurting because of her words hollowed her. She stepped outside for fresh air, though the cold bit at her cheeks. The valley lay draped in winter's muted palette, the forest dark and inscrutable. She found herself walking toward the ridge where Tala often tracked game. The snow beneath her boots whispered with each step. She didn't intend to seek him directly. She only needed to stand in the places he had stood, to feel the quiet he left behind. She reached a clearing where the wind tangled through the pines. There, nestled against a fallen log, she found something unexpected. His shirt, the one she had repaired and left for him days before. It was folded carefully, almost reverently, as if he had touched every stitch with his own regret. Eleanor lifted it, fingers tracing the seams. A tight ache coiled in her chest. This was a message from a man who did not use words. A confession of confusion, maybe sorrow. She clutched it close, feeling a yearning so deep it frightened her. Footsteps echoed abruptly from behind. She turned, breath catching. Douglas Avery approached, face stiff with irritation. "You shouldn't wander out here alone," he said sharply. "It's dangerous." Eleanor stepped back instinctively. "I'm fine." Douglas eyed the shirt in her arms, jaw tightening. "Still chasing after the savage?" Her spine straightened. "Don't call him that." Douglas scoffed. "He's not a man you should put faith in. I heard he disappeared last night. Likely ran from something. Or toward trouble." Eleanor shook her head. "You don't know him." "I know enough," Douglas snapped. "Enough to see he's tearing at your mind. You need stability. Not a ghost who haunts the trees." Before she could reply, Douglas reached to take her elbow. She jerked away. "Don't touch me." His expression hardened, wounded pride sharpening into anger. "You're making a mistake." "Leave," she said, voice steady despite the storm in her chest. He hesitated a moment, then turned sharply and strode back toward the settlement, boots crunching loudly as if he wanted the valley to hear his frustration. Eleanor waited until the sound faded. Then she looked toward the forest again, the shirt heavy in her hands. The cold deepened around her, but beneath it something else pulsed, a certainty that Tala's disappearance wasn't abandonment. It was a breaking point. And somewhere in the woods, she sensed a truth approaching, slow but unstoppable, like the first thaw of spring beneath frozen ground. Twilight arrived early that evening, settling over Broken Arrow Valley like a blanket woven from the last breath of winter. Eleanor Hayes stood at the edge of the settlement, staring toward the forest where shadows stitched themselves between trees. Tala's shirt, her mended offering returned to her with silent honesty, hung over her arm like a question she no longer knew how to answer. The children played quietly near the fire behind her, though their eyes drifted to her often, sensing the turmoil she carried. The cold deepened around her, crisp and watchful, as if the entire valley were holding still, waiting for something to break loose from the silence. The winter festival lanterns flickered to life one by one, casting soft halos of amber light across the clearing. People gathered in cautious clusters, talking in low voices, their breath rising like pale ghosts. Eleanor joined them only because Caleb tugged at her sleeve, and Lydia whispered that she wanted to hear the music before it ended. So she walked with them, though her thoughts drifted like smoke toward the ridge where Tala often walked alone. The music began gently, violins humming against the wind, boots tapping quietly. Children chased sparks from the bonfire, letting laughter spin warmth into the air. Eleanor forced herself to smile, though it wavered at the edges. Every sound felt distant, every lantern dimmer than usual, as though joy had wrapped itself in wool and retreated somewhere she could not reach. Douglas Avery appeared beside her, stiff as a man trying too hard to look casual. "You came," he said. "I thought you'd be hiding away again." She kept her gaze on her children. "I'm here for them." Douglas watched her for a long moment, his expression tightening as his eyes drifted to the forest. "He isn't coming," he said. "Men like him always vanish when you need them most." Eleanor said nothing, but her pulse throbbed painfully. She wanted to deny it, wanted to speak the truth she felt beneath her ribs, but doubt coiled like a cold hand inside her chest. Before Douglas could say anything else, a scream cut through the night. It came from beyond the barns, sharp and terrified. People froze. Then someone shouted about wolves. Another claimed a child had wandered off. Panic rippled through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Eleanor's heart seized. Lydia had been chasing sparks only moments ago. Caleb stood beside her now, eyes wide, but Lydia was nowhere in sight. Eleanor called her daughter's name, voice breaking through the chaos. She ran toward the barns, Caleb right behind her, but the darkness swallowed sound and shape alike. The wind sharpened. Shouts clashed with the pounding of hooves as frightened horses reared within their stalls. Fear gnawed at Eleanor's resolve until her knees nearly buckled. Then a shadow moved, swift, tall, unmistakable, cutting through the confusion like a blade through cloth. Tala Redhawk emerged from the darkness with the force of a storm breaking open. His bare chest glistened with frost and sweat, breaths heavy, eyes locked on the field behind the barns. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward the sounds of snarling, his strides devouring the frozen ground. Eleanor ran after him, but he vanished into the gloom beyond the last lantern. She followed the sounds, the panicked bleating of goats, the furious snapping of wolves, Lydia's cry rising above it all like a fragile thread of terror. When she reached the fence, she saw it. A wolf had cornered Lydia against the haystack, teeth bared, breath steaming in the cold. The girl pressed her back to the wood, trembling so violently she seemed to shiver in pieces. Eleanor screamed her name, but the wind carried her voice away. Tala reached the wolf first. He stepped between the animal and the child with a fierce, protective precision that silenced everything around them. His muscles tightened beneath the winter light, breath rumbling like distant thunder. The wolf lunged, snapping at his arm, but Tala grabbed it by the scruff and forced it down with sheer, immovable strength. Another wolf approached, but he roared, a sound primal and commanding, echoing through the valley, and the second wolf fled into the trees. The first struggled, then tore free and vanished after its companion, leaving Tala standing beneath the moonlight like a warrior sculpted from storm and earth. He turned immediately, sweeping Lydia into his arms. She clung to him, face buried against his shoulder, sobbing with relief. Eleanor reached them seconds later, collapsing around her daughter, gathering her with desperate hands. Tala stepped back slightly, allowing mother and child to reunite, but his chest rose and fell with an emotion deeper than exhaustion. Caleb arrived, breath ragged, eyes shining. "You saved her," he whispered. Tala looked at him, then at Eleanor, and something in his expression softened in a way she had never seen before. It frightened her. It comforted her. It cracked something open inside her all at once. "Why were you out here?" Eleanor whispered. "For you," he said quietly. The words knocked the air from her lungs. He looked down, almost ashamed of the truth unspooling from him. "I heard the sound last night. I came because I feared it meant trouble. I stayed because I could not walk away without knowing you were safe." Eleanor's throat tightened painfully. "You said you couldn't give what I asked." He stepped closer, voice low and trembling. "I said it because I am a man who lost before. Because to love again felt like digging up graves. Because your question struck a place in me I thought was long dead." Wind curled around them, carrying lantern light and distant murmurs, but the world had narrowed to trembling breaths and the soft whimpering of Lydia clinging between them. Tala's voice broke as he continued. "But tonight, when I saw your daughter alone, when I heard your voice calling out, I felt something I could not ignore. Something stronger than the fear that has chained me for years." He lowered himself to one knee before her, not as a man defeated, but as one choosing vulnerability over armor. "I am not too old for love," he whispered. "I was only afraid of it. Afraid of losing again. Afraid of letting my heart live where it could break." Eleanor's tears finally spilled, warm against the winter air. Tala reached for her hand, his touch gentle as snowfall. "If you still want a father for your children, choose me. If you want a partner who will stand by you through every winter, choose me. Eleanor Hayes, I have loved you longer than I understood." The world seemed to still around them. The lanterns hummed. The fire cracked softly. Even the wind paused, listening. Eleanor cupped his face with both hands, voice trembling like a thawing river. "Come home with us." Tala rose slowly, gathering Lydia's small hand in one of his and allowing Caleb to take the other. Eleanor walked beside him, her steps matching his, the four of them moving together toward the warm glow of the festival lights. As they crossed the clearing, people watched in breath-held silence, a widow, her children, and the giant warrior who had finally laid down his sorrow. Something in the valley shifted then, quiet but profound, like the first crack of ice before spring breaks through. Winter had not ended. But a new beginning had.